I died with a bronze medal in my hand and hatred in my heart. That might sound dramatic, but when you've spent 15 years of your life training for something, only to have it stolen from you twice, drama feels justified. It wasn't even the medal that bothered me. Bronze is still an Olympic medal. It was the knowledge that I'd earned gold. Everyone knew I'd earned gold, and politics had robbed me again. Mira, you need to calm down, my coach, Sergey, whispered urgently, his thick Russian accent more pronounced under stress. The cameras are watching. I forced my expression into neutrality as I stepped off the podium, the weight of the bronze medal feeling like a mockery around my neck. Ahead of me, Vanessa Carter waved to the crowd, her gold medal gleaming under the stadium lights. America's darling, the gymnast with the perfect smile, perfect family, and perfect corporate sponsors. That dismount was flawless, I hissed through my fixed smile. Even the Russian judge gave me a 9.8. Politics, Sergey muttered, ushering me toward the exit. Some things never change. Politics, the word I'd grown to hate. Politics was why, despite scoring higher than Vanessa in the preliminary rounds, I was standing with bronze. Politics was why the American Gymnastics Federation had pushed her forward at every turn, while I, the awkward, blunt daughter of Korean immigrants who refused to play nice with sponsors, was perpetually sidelined. I'd seen the judges' faces when I landed that dismount. I'd seen their reluctant admiration before they deliberately lowered their scores. Just like 4 years ago in Tokyo, when I'd also placed third behind Vanessa, my lungs felt tight as we walked through the tunnel toward the locker rooms. The familiar sensation had been growing over the past few months, a persistent pressure that doctors had dismissed as stress or anxiety. Go change, Sergey said. Press conference in 30 minutes. Remember, diplomatic. I nodded mechanically, walking into the locker room. It was empty. The other gymnasts already finished with interviews or still out on the floor. I sat heavily on a bench, finally letting my smile drop. 15 years. 15 years of 5 a.m. practices, of hands calloused and bleeding, of skipping school dances, of my parents remortgaging their house to pay for training. 15 years of fighting against a system that had already chosen its golden girl before we even touched the apparatus. The pressure in my chest increased, and I took shallow breaths, trying to ease it. My phone buzzed with notifications. Probably my parents, wanting to congratulate me on the bronze they believed I'd fairly earned. I didn't check it. Instead, I stared at the bronze medal, its weight suddenly unbearable. I took it off, holding it under the fluorescent lights. Third best in the world was still extraordinary, everyone would say. But when you know you're the best and politics makes you third, extraordinary feels like failure. The pain in my chest suddenly spiked. I gasped, dropping the medal as both hands clutched at my sternum. The pressure was crushing now, radiating down my left arm. I tried to call out, but no sound emerged. Heart attack, my brain supplied clinically, even as black spots appeared in my vision. I'm having a heart attack at 28. My last thought before consciousness faded was absurdly petty. At least Vanessa won't get to be sympathetic at my funeral. Then nothing. I opened my eyes to blinding white light, my body feeling strangely weightless. Hospital, I thought immediately. They'd found me in time. The light resolved into a plain white ceiling, and I turned my head slightly, expecting to see medical equipment. Instead, I saw my childhood bedroom. Not my adult apartment with its minimalist furniture and carefully displayed medals. My actual childhood bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars my dad had meticulously arranged in accurate constellations. The Justin Timberlake poster my mother had reluctantly allowed. The stack of 17 magazines I'd hidden from Sergey, who thought they promoted unhealthy body image. I sat up abruptly, heart racing. This was impossible. This room had been converted to my father's home office years ago, after I moved out at 18 to train full-time. Mira, breakfast? My mother's voice called from downstairs, her voice unmistakable but somehow younger, more energetic than the tired tone I'd grown accustomed to. In a daze, I slid out of bed, my body feeling strangely light and small. I caught my reflection in the mirror on my closet door and froze. The face staring back at me wasn't the toned, mature 28-year-old Olympic gymnast with the perpetual furrow between her brows. It was me at, I squinted, assessing, 16? 17? My face rounder, eyes wider, hair in the practical chin-length bob I'd worn throughout high school. "This isn't possible," I whispered, bringing my hands to my face. But it was my face, my teenage face. "Mira, you'll be late for school," my mother called again. School? I hadn't been in school for a decade. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. A dream? Some bizarre hallucination as my oxygen-deprived brain shut down on that locker room floor? I moved to my desk on autopilot, picking up the school planner lying open there. The date stared back at me. September 15th, 2014. 2014? If this was real, and it couldn't be real, but if somehow it was, I had just turned 17. I was a high school junior. The Rio Olympics were still 2 years away. Tokyo, 4 years after that. Paris, where I'd just won bronze, was a full decade in the future. "Mira Kim, I am not calling you again." Now my mother sounded irritated. "Coming," I called back, my voice cracking on the word. It was higher than I remembered, missing the confident edge I'd developed as an adult. I dressed quickly in jeans and a hoodie I found in my closet, then headed downstairs, still reeling. My parents sat at the kitchen table, both impossibly young. My mother's hair was still fully black, missing the strands of gray she'd earned supporting my career. My father's face was unlined, his shoulders straight instead of stooped from years of physical labor. "Did you finish your math homework?" my mother asked, setting a bowl of rice and a fried egg in front of me. "Mrs. Patterson emailed that you didn't turn in the last assignment." I stared at them, overwhelmed. My parents. Alive, healthy, unburdened by the years of financial stress my gymnastics career would cause them. My father wouldn't have his first heart attack for another 3 years. My mother wouldn't develop the persistent insomnia that would age her beyond her years. "Mira?" My father looked concerned now. "Are you feeling okay?" The question broke something in me. I launched from my chair and hugged him fiercely, then did the same to my startled mother. "What's gotten into you?" she asked, though she hugged me back. "Everything," I wanted to say. Death, rebirth, a second chance at a life that had been consumed by bitterness and disappointment. Instead, I just smiled. "Nothing. I just had a really weird dream." My father nodded sagely. "Too much studying before bed. Your brain needs rest." I sat back down, picking up my chopsticks. The food tasted better than anything I could remember. Maybe because adult me had been on a ruthlessly restricted diet for years. "Don't forget, Sergey wants you at the gym by 4, my mother said, checking her watch. "And remember, the Carters invited us to their barbecue this weekend. Vanessa's mom says she has big news." I nearly choked on my rice. The Carters, Vanessa, of course. In 2014, Vanessa Carter and I still trained at the same gym in Arlington, Virginia. We hadn't yet become bitter rivals. In fact, we'd been something like friends once, before the Federation started playing favorites and drove a wedge between us. I swallowed, mind racing. If this wasn't a dream or hallucination, if somehow I'd actually gone back in time, I was looking at a complete do-over. All the mistakes, all the politics, all the bitterness that had poisoned my first life. I could change it all, or I could simply walk away. Choose a different path entirely. I remembered the crushing chest pain in that Paris locker room. The doctors had warned me for years that my heart wasn't normal, a minor congenital defect exacerbated by extreme physical stress. In my previous life, I'd ignored them, pushing through symptoms, mainlining caffeine to power through training when my body begged for rest. That path had killed me at 28. "I don't think I can make practice today," I said suddenly. "I'm not feeling well." My parents exchanged alarmed glances. In my first life, I'd never voluntarily missed practice. Not when I had strep throat, not when my grandmother died, not even when that boy I'd secretly liked had finally asked me to a movie. "Are you sure?" my father asked. "Sergey says the national coaches are coming next week. You need to be prepared." The pressure to perform, to please, to pursue this path that would ultimately kill me. It was already there, coiling around my 17-year-old shoulders. I looked at my parents, really looked at them. The hope in their eyes, the pride, the investment they'd already made in my potential. In 2014, They'd already remortgaged the house once for my training fees. Actually, I think I just need more sleep, I said, backpedaling. I'll go to practice. My mother nodded approvingly, and the moment passed. I finished breakfast in a daze, grabbed my backpack, and headed out the door toward a high school I barely remembered. As I walked, my mind spun with possibilities. I had knowledge no teenager should possess. I knew which colleges would offer scholarships. I knew which coaches would develop young gymnasts and which would break them. I knew which skills would become required elements in future competitions. Most importantly, I knew the path my life had taken, right up until my death at 28, and could choose differently this time. By the time I reached the sprawling brick building of Arlington Heights High School, I'd made my decision. I wouldn't quit gymnastics, not yet, but I would approach it differently, smarter. I wouldn't let it consume me, and I would be prepared for the politics that had destroyed me the first time around. The hallways were a blur of faces I vaguely recognized. Former classmates who'd become Facebook friends I barely interacted with. Teachers whose names I'd forgotten. My muscle memory guided me to a locker I didn't remember the combination for. "Mira!" a voice called, and I turned to see teenage Vanessa Carter bouncing toward me, blonde ponytail swinging, not yet the calculated media darling she would become. "Did you hear? Coach says we have a shot at the exhibition in New York next month." I stared at her, memories colliding. This energetic, genuinely talented girl would become my nemesis. Would be given opportunities I earned. Would stand on 2 Olympic podiums above me while judges deliberately underscored my routines. But she hadn't done it yet. And maybe in this new timeline, she never would. I forced a smile. "That's great, Vanessa." She tilted her head, studying me. "Are you okay? You seem weird today." "You have no idea," I thought. "Just tired," I said. "Hey, are your parents still doing that barbecue this weekend?" "Yeah, Dad's grilling his famous ribs." "You'll come, right? I want to tell everyone my big news together." The big news. In my first life, that had been the announcement that Vanessa had been selected for specialized training with the national team coaches, an opportunity I wouldn't be offered for another year, despite consistently outscoring her, the first domino in a long line of political favoritism. I smiled tightly. Wouldn't miss it. The gym smelled exactly as I remembered. Chalk dust, sweat, and the faint antiseptic they used on the mats. Sergey's Universal Gymnastics occupied a former warehouse, converted with uneven bars, balance beams, vaults, and a spring floor that had been state-of-the-art in 2010. I changed into my practice leotard on autopilot, my body feeling simultaneously foreign and familiar. Younger, less defined muscles. No old injuries that ached before it rained. But the same flexibility, the same ingrained movements, honed by thousands of repetitions. "Mira, you're late!" Sergey's voice boomed across the gym. He looked so much younger, his beard still more brown than gray, fewer lines around his eyes. "Sorry, coach," I called back, hurrying to join the group already warming up. Vanessa was there, along with 8 other girls I remembered with varying degrees of clarity. In 4 years, only Vanessa and I would still be competing at this level. 2 would suffer career-ending injuries. 3 would burn out. 1 would develop an eating disorder that would haunt her well into adulthood. I knew all this as I stretched beside them, these futures they couldn't imagine. 5 minutes on the board, then split into apparatus groups, Sergey instructed. Carter, Kim, Bishop on beam first. The springboard was a simple training tool, just a slightly elevated, slightly springy platform to practice proper foot position for tumbling. I stepped onto it, muscle memory taking over as I practiced basic jumps, my body remembering what my conscious mind had long forgotten. It felt good, natural, like slipping into a favorite sweater. But as I continued through practice, beam, then floor, then vault, then bars, I found myself holding back. Not deliberately making mistakes, but not pushing for the extreme difficulty I knew my body could theoretically handle. In my first life, I'd pushed through pain, forced skills before I was ready, all in pursuit of higher difficulty scores to offset the politics. That path had led to injuries, resentment, and, ultimately, death. "What's wrong with you today?" Sergey demanded after I performed a relatively simple dismount from the uneven bars. "Where is your Tkachev?" The Tkachev, a release move where the gymnast flies over the high bar, hands free before catching it again, had been one of my signature skills. But in my first life, I'd mastered it at 17 by practicing until my hands bled, ignoring the warning signs my body sent. "Just not feeling it today, coach," I replied. His bushy eyebrows drew together. "National coaches come next week. You want to impress with basics?" I met his gaze steadily. "I want to be consistent, build a solid foundation." He stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. In my first life, I'd been the gymnast who always demanded more difficulty, who pushed hardest, who stayed latest. "We talk after practice," he said finally, before moving on to correct Vanessa's form on the low bar. I watched her work, seeing both the talented teenager she was now and the media-perfect gymnast she would become. In my first life, I'd grown to resent her, for the opportunities handed to her, for the perfect image she projected, for the judges who favored her style over my technical precision. Now, I just felt sorry for her. She didn't know the pressure that was coming, the expectations that would reshape her into something more brand than person. Maybe that could change too. After practice, Sergey called me into his cluttered office. Soviet-era medals hung on one wall, remnants of his own competitive career before the Iron Curtain fell. "What is happening, Mira?" he asked without preamble. "You move like you are afraid today." I considered how to answer. The truth, I died and came back in time, and I'm trying not to make the same mistakes, wasn't an option. "I've been thinking about longevity," I said carefully, "about building skills properly instead of rushing." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "This is not like you." "Maybe it should be," I countered. "How many gymnasts peak at 17 and burn out by 20? I want to still be competing at 25, 28. The irony of those numbers wasn't lost on me. "You have Olympic potential," Sergey said, "but window is small for women's gymnastics." "The window is small because we destroy our bodies getting there," I replied, with more heat than I intended. "What if I could be stronger, more consistent by pacing myself?" He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "You have been watching old Soviet training videos?" I almost laughed. "No, just living an entire career that hadn't happened yet." "Something like that," I said. "I just think maybe there's another approach." Sergey was quiet for a long moment. "I have watched many talented gymnasts break themselves," he finally said. "If you are serious about building foundation first, we can try a different approach." Relief flooded through me. In my first life, this conversation had gone differently. I'd pushed for higher difficulty regardless of risk, and Sergey, competitive coach that he was, had encouraged it. "I am serious," I said. He nodded once. "We start tomorrow, but—" He held up one finger. "National coaches still come next week. You must show them something." I'd forgotten about that visit. In my first life, I'd performed well, but not spectacularly. Vanessa had been the one invited to the National Training Center the following month. I wouldn't get that invitation for another year, setting back my progression toward the Olympic team. "I'll be ready," I promised. That weekend, I found myself in the Carter's backyard, surrounded by gymnastics families and the scent of barbecue. My parents chatted with other adults while the gymnasts clustered around the pool, those not restricted by strict diet protocols indulging in chips and soda. It was surreal seeing these people again. In my first life, most of these relationships had faded as competition intensified. By the time I made my first Olympic team, I'd had no friends outside the sport and few within it. I sat on the edge of the pool, feet dangling in the water, feeling strangely disconnected from the teenage conversations around me. Worries about homecoming dates and chemistry tests seemed absurdly trivial after living through an entire adult life. "You're still being weird," Vanessa said, dropping down beside me. She wore a bright pink bikini that showed off the defined muscles of a teenage elite gymnast. "Just thinking," I replied, "about the national coaches visit." She bumped my shoulder with hers. "My dad says they're specifically coming to see us. You, me, and maybe Taylor." In my first timeline, that had been true. The three of us had been Arlington's rising stars, though Taylor would blow out her ACL the following year and never fully recover. "Your big news," I said, remembering. "Is it about that?" Vanessa beamed. "I can't tell you yet. Dad wants to make an announcement when everyone's here." I nodded, already knowing what was coming. Ralph Carter, Vanessa's father, was a marketing executive with connections throughout the sports world. In my first life, he'd leveraged those connections to get Vanessa special consideration from the national coaching staff, the first step in a path that would eventually lead to her being favored over more technically proficient gymnasts, like me. Mira, Vanessa said, suddenly serious, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever think about not doing this anymore? She gestured vaguely toward her own athletic body. Like just being normal? The question startled me. In my first life, Vanessa had never expressed doubt about her gymnastics path. Not to me, anyway. She'd seemed laser-focused, perfectly content to be the Federation's rising star. Sometimes, I admitted. It's a lot to give up for something so uncertain. She nodded, looking relieved. My mom keeps talking about college scholarships and Olympics, and Dad's going on about sponsorships. And sometimes I just want to go to the mall without worrying about how many stairs I'm climbing. I studied her face, this girl who wasn't yet my rival, who was apparently harboring the same doubts I'd suppressed in my first life. What would you do? I asked. If you weren't a gymnast? She looked startled, as if no one had ever asked her that question. I don't know, she said finally. Something with kids, maybe? I like helping with the rec classes. She dipped her hand in the pool, creating ripples. But it doesn't matter. I can't quit now. Why not? My parents have invested too much, and Dad's been talking to these sponsors. She trailed off, then forced a bright smile. Anyway, it's not like I actually want to quit. I was just wondering if you ever think about it. Before I could respond, Ralph Carter's booming voice called everyone's attention to the patio where he stood with a glass raised. Thank you all for coming today, he announced, every inch the successful executive in his polo shirt and designer sunglasses. We wanted to share some exciting news with our gymnastics family first. Vanessa rose and walked to join her parents, her earlier vulnerability masked by a practiced smile. I watched her go, piecing together a reality I hadn't seen in my first life. Vanessa hadn't wanted this path either. As many of you know, Ralph continued, the national coaching staff will be visiting next week. What you may not know is that they've already expressed particular interest in certain athletes. He placed a proud hand on Vanessa's shoulder. I'm thrilled to announce that regardless of next week's evaluation, Vanessa has been guaranteed a spot at the national training camp next month. Murmurs rippled through the gathered families. This was unusual protocol. National training camp spots were supposed to be earned through evaluation, not pre-assigned. Additionally, Ralph beamed, Carter Fitness Supplements has signed on as a major sponsor of the American Gymnastics Federation for the next Olympic cycle. We're proud to support these incredible athletes on their journey. The adults applauded politely, though I noticed some parents exchanging glances. The connection was obvious. Ralph's company becomes a major federation sponsor, and coincidentally, his daughter gets special treatment. This was the moment in my first life when the politics became undeniable. When I realized the path to the Olympics wasn't just about who performed best, but this time I had an advantage. I knew how this game was played, and I had 12 years of hindsight to guide my response. As the gathering broke into smaller conversations, I approached Vanessa and her father, my smile firmly in place. Congratulations, I said sincerely. That's amazing news. Ralph Carter regarded me with the slightly dismissive look I remembered well, the look of someone assessing a competitor and finding them lacking. Thank you, Mira, he said. Your day will come too, I'm sure. Actually, I said, I was wondering if I could talk to you about something. My economics class is doing a project on sports marketing, and I'd love to interview you about how sponsorships work in gymnastics. His expression shifted immediately to pleased surprise. In my first life, I'd avoided Ralph Carter and his corporate networking, considering it the enemy of true athletic merit. This time, I was taking a different approach. I'd be happy to help, he said. Why don't you come by my office next week? Vanessa looked between us, confusion evident on her face. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected from me. In my first life, I'd withdrawn after this announcement, letting resentment fester into a rivalry that would span a decade. Great, I said. I'm especially interested in how companies decide which events or federations to sponsor. There must be specific metrics you look at. Ralph launched into an explanation of brand alignment and target demographics, clearly pleased to share his expertise. I listened attentively, filing away information I'd use later. Because this time around, I wasn't going to fight a rigged system as an athlete. I was going to change it from the inside. And to do that, I needed to understand how money moved through the sport that had ultimately killed me. The national coach's visit changed everything, just as it had in my first life, but in a completely different way. Instead of pushing for maximum difficulty to stand out, I followed Sergey's new foundation-first approach. My routines were clean, consistent, and performed with a confidence that came from having already lived through far more pressure than a coaching evaluation. "Beautiful line on beam," the head national coach commented, making notes on her clipboard. "Your toe point is exceptional." I accepted the compliment with a nod, while Vanessa executed a flashier but sloppier routine on floor. After evaluations, the coaches spoke with Sergey while we cooled down. I already knew what they were saying. Vanessa showed promise but needed refinement. She'd get her chance at the National Training Center next month. I showed technical precision but needed more difficulty. I'd be reconsidered next year, except that's not what happened. "They want you both at national camp," Sergey announced, looking genuinely surprised. "Next month. They say your fundamentals are exactly what they want to develop." Vanessa squealed and hugged me. I hugged her back automatically, mind racing. This wasn't how it had gone before. In my first life, I'd been passed over, the first in a series of slights that built my resentment. "There's more," Sergey continued. "They specifically mentioned college recruitment. Apparently, UCLA and Stanford coaches will be visiting the camp." College recruitment? In my first life, I'd dismissed college gymnastics as a step down from elite competition. I'd trained through high school with only the Olympics in mind, abandoning any notion of higher education until after my competitive career ended. But college gymnastics offered something elite competition hadn't: a more sustainable path, less politics, more team support, and an education to fall back on. "My parents will be thrilled," I said, already imagining a future different from the one I'd lived. A future where my identity wasn't solely defined by my performance on 4 apparatuses. A future where I might live past 28. Ralph Carter's office was exactly what I'd expected. Corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, shelves displaying Carter Fitness Supplements products, alongside photos of Ralph with various sports celebrities. A framed picture of Vanessa in competition held a prominent position on his desk. "What brings you here, Mira?" he asked, gesturing me to a chair while his assistant brought in coffee I hadn't requested. I'd prepared for this meeting carefully. At 17, I was still technically a minor, but I'd lived an adult life in my mind. I knew how to navigate this conversation in a way my teenage self never could have. "Officially my economics project," I said, taking out a notebook for show. "But honestly, I've been thinking about the business side of gymnastics more seriously." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "Elite gymnastics has a sustainability problem," I said directly. "Athletes peak young, sponsors want young faces, but the physical toll means most careers are incredibly short." He leaned back, studying me with new interest. "You sound like you've given this some thought." "I have." I met his gaze steadily. What if there was a way to extend elite careers? To make the sport more sustainable for athletes and more profitable for sponsors? This was the hook. Ralph Carter cared about 2 things: his daughter's success and business opportunities. I was offering a conversation about both. "I'm listening," he said. For the next hour, I outlined ideas that my first life self would have developed years later, after retiring from competition and completing a business degree. Ideas about changing training approaches to extend careers, creating competitions that showcased veteran gymnasts, and developing sponsorship models that valued longevity over the latest teenage sensation. Ralph took notes, asked questions, challenged assumptions in ways that forced me to draw on knowledge my 17-year-old self shouldn't possess. "This is unexpectedly sophisticated," he said finally. "Where did these ideas come from?" I shrugged. "I've been watching how other sports handle athlete careers. Tennis players compete into their 30s. Swimmers, too. Why not gymnasts?" He nodded thoughtfully. "The Federation's approach has always been to cycle through young talent. It's easier than evolving the sport." He tapped his pen against his desk. But there's potential here, especially with the right spokesperson. Vanessa, I suggested. His eyes sharpened. What about Vanessa? She has the profile. The Federation already favors her. I chose my words carefully. But what if instead of being just another young champion who flames out, she became the face of a new approach to the sport? One that values sustainability and longevity? I could see the wheels turning in Ralph's mind. In my first life, he'd pushed Vanessa hard for quick success, leveraging his corporate connections to give her advantages over gymnasts like me. That path had won her gold medals, but left her physically damaged and emotionally hollow by 25. It would require a different training approach, he mused, different messaging. Exactly, I agreed, and it would need corporate backing to show the Federation there's a market for it. He smiled slowly. Like Carter Fitness supplements. I nodded. A company that positions itself not just as helping athletes perform better, but helping them perform better for longer. By the time I left Ralph's office, I'd accomplished more than I'd hoped. He'd invited me to join a focus group of young athletes testing new training supplements. He'd asked me to share my ideas with his marketing team. Most importantly, he'd started viewing me not as his daughter's competition, but as a valuable connection. In my first life, Ralph Carter had been the architect of the favoritism that derailed my career. In this new timeline, I was positioning him to become an unwitting ally in changing the system that had killed me. The national training camp was both familiar and strange. The Texas facility hadn't changed. The same cavernous gymnasium, the same Spartan dormitories, the same cafeteria serving carefully controlled portions. But my approach was completely different. In my first life, I'd arrived at this camp, a year later than Vanessa, determined to prove myself through difficulty and risk. I'd pushed through pain, hidden injuries, and earned reluctant acknowledgement from coaches who'd already decided their favorites. This time, I stuck to my foundation-first approach. I performed clean, consistent routines that showcased perfect form rather than maximum difficulty. I spoke up during team meetings, offering insights on technique that a 17-year-old shouldn't have known. I made connections with other gymnasts, including those who would eventually become my Olympic teammates. Most significantly, I watched for the college scouts. Stanford is interested in your academic background, Sergey informed me after the scouts observed our training. They say your grades and your beam work are both exceptional. In my first life, I dismissed college recruitment in favor of pursuing the elite Olympic track exclusively. I'd never even considered Stanford with its prestigious academics and competitive gymnastics program. I'd like to talk with them, I said. Sergey looked surprised but nodded. I arranged meeting. The Stanford coach, a former elite gymnast herself, spoke frankly about the benefits of college gymnastics. You'd have a full scholarship, world-class training facilities, and a degree from one of the best universities in the world when your gymnastics career ends. When, not if. That was refreshing honesty after years in the elite world where no one acknowledged careers must eventually end. What about Olympic training? I asked. Could I still pursue that while competing for Stanford? We've had several gymnasts do both, she confirmed. It's challenging, but not impossible. And honestly, the balance can help prevent burnout. Burnout, injuries, politics, all the things that had worn me down in my first life. I'm very interested, I told her. That night in the dormitory, Vanessa found me reviewing the Stanford materials. You're thinking about college? She asked, sitting on the edge of my bed. What about the Olympics? I'm thinking about both, I said. What about you? She glanced around, making sure no one was listening. My dad wants me to defer college. Focus on elite only. He says with his sponsorship connections, I don't need a scholarship. This matched what had happened in my first life. Vanessa had skipped college, turned professional at 18, and become the face of multiple brands while training for the Olympics. It had won her gold medals and lucrative contracts, but by 28, the age I'd died, she'd been quietly battling depression and pain medication dependency. What do you want? I asked. She looked startled by the question. I don't know, I never really thought I had a choice. You do, I said simply. Your dad's connections can still help you, even if you choose a different path. She was quiet for a long moment. UCLA asked about me. Their campus is amazing, and their gymnastics team seems fun. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm so tired of not having fun, Mira. I reached out and squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of protectiveness for this girl who'd been my rival in another life. Then maybe you should tell your dad that. The next 2 years unfolded in ways both familiar and wildly different from my first life. I still trained with Sergey, but with a transformed approach, building difficulty gradually, prioritizing recovery, cross-training to prevent injuries. I still competed nationally, but with less desperation and more strategic focus. I still kept my eye on the Olympics, but as one goal among many, not the sole purpose of my existence. Most significantly, I accepted Stanford's scholarship offer. By the time I graduated high school in 2016, I had already begun reshaping my future. The 2016 Rio Olympics arrived right after my high school graduation. In my first life, I'd made the Olympic team by the skin of my teeth, performed well but not spectacularly, and watched Vanessa take gold while I finished fourth in the all-around, my first major international competition without a medal. This time was different. I think you should defer for a year, the Stanford coach suggested during a campus visit. Train for Rio, then start college in the fall of 2017. We'll hold your scholarship. It was a generous offer and strategically sound, but I had knowledge my coach didn't. In my first life, Rio had been the beginning of my heart problems. The extreme training, the pressure, the Brazilian heat, something about that combination had triggered the first warning signs of the condition that would eventually kill me. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I'm thinking about focusing on the 2020 Olympics instead, building up to it through NCAA competition. Her eyebrows shot up. That's unusual. Most elite gymnasts want to hit their first Olympics as young as possible. I'm playing the long game, I replied, and I was, in ways she couldn't possibly understand. I declined the national team invitation that spring, citing my focus on academics and NCAA competition. The gymnastics community was shocked. A rising elite gymnast choosing college over Olympic trials was practically unheard of. The person most shocked, however, was Vanessa. Are you seriously not trying for Rio? She demanded when we met for coffee during a rare break in her training schedule. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she winced slightly when she reached for her cup, telltale signs of the overtraining I remembered from my first life. I'm taking a different path, I explained. Stanford, NCAA competition, then maybe a return to elite for Tokyo. But Rio is right there. She gestured expansively, nearly knocking over her coffee. We were supposed to do this together. In my first life, we'd been fierce rivals by this point, barely speaking except through gritted teeth at competitions. This Vanessa, still intense but not yet hardened by the elite gymnastics machine, seemed genuinely disappointed by my decision. You'll be amazing, I assured her, and I'll be cheering for you the whole way. She studied me, confusion evident in her expression. I don't get you anymore, Mira. You were always the most driven, the most intense. What changed? Everything, I wanted to say. I died at 28 with a bronze medal and a failing heart because I pushed too hard for too long. Instead, I smiled. Perspective. There's more than one way to succeed in this sport. I watched the Rio Olympics from my Stanford dorm room, having moved in early for preseason training. My new teammates gathered around, cheering for the American women as they dominated the competition. Vanessa performed beautifully, winning team gold with the American squad and placing second in the all-around to a brilliant Russian gymnast. She looked ecstatic on the podium, her silver medal gleaming, a different outcome than my original timeline, where she'd taken gold after a controversial judging decision went her way. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Wish you were here. Silver's not as fun as gold would have been. I smiled, typing back, You were incredible. Silver at 18 means you'll be even better at 22 for Tokyo. Her response came hours later. If I survive that long, everything hurts and Dad's already talking about world championships. That familiar pang of empathy and concern rose in my chest. In my first life, I'd been too consumed by my own ambitions and resentments to notice how the system was grinding Vanessa down too. Now I could see it clearly. She was on the same destructive path I'd followed, just with more corporate backing. I needed to accelerate my plans. Stanford transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The balance of academics and athletics forced me to become more efficient, more strategic with my energy. The university's renowned business program gave me tools I would use for years to come. Most importantly, the medical staff caught my heart condition early, prescribing a treatment regimen that would have saved my life in the first timeline. It's a minor defect, the cardiologist explained, showing me the echocardiogram. Completely manageable with the right medication and monitoring. You're lucky we caught it. Many athletes with this condition don't show symptoms until it's severe. Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. Forewarned, perhaps. Meanwhile, I excelled in NCAA gymnastics in ways that surprised everyone except me. The reduced training hours compared to elite gymnastics allowed my body to recover properly. The team atmosphere replaced the cutthroat isolation I'd experienced before. My knowledge of proper technique, earned through a full career that hadn't happened yet, made me a natural leader. By my sophomore year, I was Stanford's top all-around performer and a team captain. "You compete like someone who's been doing this for decades," my coach commented after I led our team to a conference championship. Such mature decision-making. If only she knew. But while college gymnastics fulfilled me in ways elite competition never had, I kept my eye on the bigger picture. I maintained contact with Ralph Carter, sharing business insights that impressed him, and occasionally checking in on Vanessa, who was struggling under the weight of post-Olympic expectations. "She's not sleeping," Ralph confided during one of our now regular phone calls. "The doctors want her to take time off, but Worlds are coming up and the sponsors expect appearances." "She's 19, I reminded him gently. "She has at least one more Olympic cycle in her if you don't burn her out now." It was advice I would never have offered in my first life, when Vanessa's struggles would have simply meant more opportunities for me. But in this timeline, I was playing a different game altogether. The summer after my sophomore year, I made my move. "Mr. Carter," I said, sitting across from him in his office, now armed with 2 years of Stanford business education and the confidence of my 29-year-old mind. "I have a proposition for you." He smiled indulgently. "I'm listening, Mira." "Your company has the largest sponsorship agreement with the American Gymnastics Federation. You're essentially bankrolling the sport, but you're not leveraging that position effectively." His smile faltered. "I'm not following." I laid out a comprehensive proposal. Carter Fitness Supplements would create a new division focused on athlete career longevity. They would develop products specifically designed for long-term performance rather than short-term gains. Most importantly, they would establish the Carter Sustainability Initiative, a foundation that would sponsor events and training programs designed to extend gymnasts' careers. "The average elite gymnast retires by 22, I explained, displaying the PowerPoint I'd spent months developing. But what if they could compete at the highest level until 28, 30, even 32? That's years of additional brand exposure for sponsors." Ralph leaned forward, interest peaked. "NCAA gymnasts do tend to have longer careers." "Exactly, because the system is different. Less intense training, more focus on consistency over extreme difficulty, better medical support." I flipped to the next slide. Now imagine bringing those principles to elite gymnastics with Carter Fitness leading the change. "The Federation won't easily change their approach," he pointed out. "They've been successful with their current model." "They will if their major sponsor insists," I countered. "And if that sponsor happens to be the father of one of their top athletes who's beginning to show signs of burnout at just 19. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "This isn't just about business for you, is it? This is about Vanessa." I held his gaze. "It's about every gymnast who's been chewed up by a system that values immediate results over athlete longevity, including your daughter." He was quiet for a long moment, studying the business projections I'd prepared. "This would require significant investment, with significant returns both financially and in terms of athlete welfare." I leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, you have the power to change this sport for the better while positioning your company at the forefront of a revolutionary approach to athletic performance. All I'm asking is that you use it." By the end of that meeting, Ralph Carter had agreed to fund a pilot program. By the end of the summer, the Carter Sustainability Initiative was officially launched, with Vanessa as its reluctant poster child and me as a student consultant who was, in reality, orchestrating the entire project. It was the first step in my plan to dismantle the system that had killed me. The next 2 years passed in a blur of classes, competitions, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The Carter Sustainability Initiative gained traction slowly at first, then, with gathering momentum as other sponsors took note. When Vanessa returned to competition after a 6-month recovery period, looking healthier and performing more consistently than she had since Rio, the initiative gained credibility. "I want you to join us officially after graduation," Ralph offered during my senior year at Stanford. "Director of Athlete Development for the initiative. You understand both the business and the sport better than anyone I've met." It was the opportunity I'd been working toward, a position of influence that would allow me to change the sport from within. "I accept," I said, "with one condition. I want to continue training for the Tokyo Olympics while working for you." He looked surprised. "You haven't competed elite in 4 years." "I've been training elite skills alongside my NCAA routines," I explained. "My Stanford coaches have been supportive. I just haven't competed internationally." This was true. Throughout my college career, I'd maintained a carefully balanced training regimen, one that protected my heart while developing the skills I would need for a return to elite competition. It was a path that hadn't existed in my first life, where elite and collegiate gymnastics were treated as completely separate worlds. Ralph considered this. It would actually be perfect for the initiative. Our director qualifying for the Olympics after taking the collegiate route would prove our entire philosophy. And so, at 22, I found myself in an unprecedented position. A Stanford graduate with a business degree, the director of a rapidly growing sports foundation, and a contender for the Tokyo Olympic team. The gymnastics world didn't know what to make of me. I'd abandoned the traditional elite path, yet returned with skills that rivaled the current national team members. I'd chosen education over single-minded athletic pursuit, yet performed with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of dedicated training. What they couldn't know was that I'd already lived this Olympic cycle before. I knew exactly which skills would score highest under the 2020 code of points. I knew which elements the judges would reward and which they would scrutinize. Most importantly, I knew how to pace myself to peak at exactly the right moment. When the Olympic trials arrived in June 2020, I was ready in ways that transcended physical preparation. I had the mental fortitude of someone who had already faced the worst outcome possible, death itself, and was now competing with house money. "You seem so calm," Vanessa commented as we warmed up side by side, just like old times. She looked better than she had in my original timeline. Healthier, less haunted, but still carried the weight of being America's gymnastics darling. "Nothing to lose," I replied with a smile. "No one expected me to be here in the first place." She laughed softly. "I always knew you would be, even when you took that detour through Stanford." She stretched her shoulders, wincing slightly. "Sometimes I wish I'd done the same." I glanced at her, noting the familiar signs of wear that were less pronounced in this timeline, but still present. "It's not too late, you know. UCLA would still take you after Tokyo." "Maybe," she said noncommittally. "Let's get through the Olympics first." The trials unfolded over 2 intense days of competition. I performed with the clean precision that had become my trademark, deliberately keeping my difficulty just high enough to be competitive without risking my heart. Vanessa competed well but showed signs of strain on the second day. When the selection committee announced the 5-member team, both our names were on it. "We did it," Vanessa whispered, hugging me tightly as cameras flashed around us. "Just like we always said we would back when we were kids." In my first life, we'd been teammates but rivals, barely acknowledging each other except when cameras required it. This time, the embrace was genuine. "Tokyo, here we come," I replied, savoring the moment while already thinking several steps ahead. Because the Olympics weren't the end game for me. They were just another step toward dismantling the system that had ultimately killed me. Tokyo in 2020 was exactly as I remembered. The humidity, the precise organization, the palpable pressure. But I moved through it differently this time, with the perspective of someone who knew that Olympic medals, however shiny, were ultimately just pieces of metal. The women's team competition came first. In my original timeline, we'd taken silver after Vanessa fell on beam. This time, with both of us performing consistent routines, the American team secured gold by a comfortable margin. The all-around competition 2 days later would prove more pivotal. Vanessa's struggling. our coach confided as we prepared for the competition. Her back is acting up again. The team doctor gave her something for the pain, but she's not at 100%. In my first life, Vanessa had competed through pain to win gold in the all-around, while I'd finished a bitter fourth. Her victory had been lauded as a triumph of American perseverance, though insiders knew it had been aided by favorable judging and aggressive pain management. Should she withdraw? I asked, already knowing the answer. The coach looked scandalized. Of course not. This is the Olympic all-around. She'll push through. And she did, though I could see the strain in her eyes as she forced smile after smile for the cameras. I competed cleanly, without the desperation that had characterized my original performance, enjoying the moment rather than fixating on the outcome. When the final scores flashed, I'd taken silver behind a brilliant Japanese gymnast who'd performed the routine of her life. Vanessa, competing at maybe 70% capacity, had managed bronze. As we stood on the podium, I felt none of the bitterness that had poisoned my first Olympic experience. The medal around my neck wasn't gold, but I'd earned it fairly without politics or favoritism clouding the result. More importantly, I was alive, healthy, and positioned to make changes that would help future generations of gymnasts. I'm proud of us, I told Vanessa as we waved to the crowd. She nodded, her smile genuine despite the pain evident in her posture. Me too, though Dad's going to be disappointed. Your father, I said carefully, should be thrilled that you medaled while injured. That's the true mark of a champion. Later that night, Ralph sought me out in the Olympic Village. You could have won gold, he said without preamble. Your execution scores were consistently higher. If you'd pushed your difficulty just a bit more. I performed exactly the routines I was capable of performing safely, I interrupted, and I'm thrilled with silver. He studied me for a moment, then sighed. You're thinking like a businesswoman, not a competitor. I'm thinking like someone who wants a long, healthy career in life, I corrected, which is exactly the philosophy of the initiative you're funding. That landed as intended. Ralph had the grace to look abashed. You're right, of course, and we're getting tremendous press from both your and Vanessa's medals. The sustainable approach narrative is gaining traction. Good, I said, because Phase 2 starts as soon as we get back to the States. Phase 2, as I had outlined to Ralph, involved leveraging the Olympic success to expand the Carter Sustainability Initiative's influence. We would launch more events, advocate for rule changes that rewarded clean execution over risky difficulty, and push for better medical protocols. What I didn't tell Ralph was my personal Phase 2, establishing financial independence so I could eventually operate without the constraints of Carter Fitness Supplement's corporate interests. I'm thinking of starting my own company, I told Vanessa over lunch, 6 months after Tokyo. A consulting firm specializing in athlete career management. She looked intrigued. Like an agent. More comprehensive than that. Career planning, investment guidance, transition strategies for post-competition life. I toyed with my salad. The average Olympic athlete retires in their 20s with no clear path forward. I want to change that. That's actually brilliant, Vanessa said. I wish I'd had something like that from the beginning. All I've ever had is my dad making decisions. I studied her, noting the subtle signs of someone on the verge of a major life change. Are you thinking about retirement? She glanced around the restaurant, then leaned forward. Don't tell my dad, but yes. My back isn't getting better, and she took a deep breath. UCLA still wants me. For academics, not just gymnastics. I could finally get that education everyone else my age already has. You should do it, I said immediately. Your body is telling you it's time, and UCLA is an amazing opportunity. Tears welled in her eyes. Dad's going to hate it. The initiative, the sponsors, they all expect me to push through to 2024. The initiative, I reminded her, is about sustainable careers and athlete welfare. If you're truly done, pushing to 2024 would be completely counter to our stated mission. She blinked. I hadn't thought of it that way. Let me handle your father, I offered. This could actually be perfect for the initiative's next phase, supporting athletes through healthy career transitions. By the time we left that lunch, we had the beginnings of a plan. Vanessa would announce her retirement, enroll at UCLA, and become a paid ambassador for the Carter Sustainability Initiative's new career transition program. I would manage the messaging to ensure Ralph saw it as an opportunity rather than a failure. More importantly, I would use this transition to establish my own company, with Vanessa as my first client. A company that would eventually give me the financial independence to operate without Carter Fitness Supplements backing. Phase 2 was proceeding even faster than I'd anticipated. By 2023, my position had evolved significantly. Kim Athletic Consulting was thriving, with a roster of Olympic and professional athletes seeking guidance on career longevity and post-competition transitions. The Carter Sustainability Initiative had successfully lobbied for rule changes in gymnastics that rewarded clean execution and penalized dangerous skills. My own training continued, though at a pace that respected my heart condition and aging body. I was 26, physically healthier than I'd been at this age in my first life, and positioned exactly where I needed to be for the final phase of my plan. The 2024 Paris Olympics were approaching rapidly, and the gymnastics world was buzzing about my potential return for a second Olympic Games, unprecedented for an American gymnast who'd taken the collegiate route. What they didn't know was that I had zero intention of competing. "You're seriously not trying for Paris?" Vanessa asked over FaceTime, her UCLA dormitory visible in the background. She looked younger somehow, unburdened by the intense training regimen she'd abandoned. "My heart's not in it," I replied, the double meaning making me smile. "I've accomplished everything I wanted to in competition." "The GOAT retiring without a gold medal? The gymnastics forums will go crazy." I laughed. "Oh, let them. I've got bigger plans for Paris." Those plans had been developing for years, pieces moving into place with the precision of a well-executed routine. The final phase would begin with a simple announcement. Kim Athletic Consulting acquires naming rights for Paris Olympic Gymnastics venue. The press release went out 6 months before the Games, sending shockwaves through the gymnastics community. A relatively new consulting firm led by a former Olympic silver medalist had somehow secured enough financing to become a major Olympic sponsor. What the press release didn't mention was where that financing had come from. Strategic investments I'd made with knowledge from my first life. Technology stocks that I knew would soar. Startup opportunities that would yield tremendous returns. A decade of financial decisions guided by information no one else possessed. The day after the announcement, Ralph Carter called. "How did you manage this?" he demanded, skipping pleasantries entirely. "Olympic venue sponsorship rights cost millions." "I've been very successful," I replied calmly, "and I have investors who believe in my vision." "Which is what exactly? Because this feels like a direct challenge to my initiative." I smiled, though he couldn't see it through the phone. "Not a challenge, Ralph, an evolution. The initiative has done wonderful work, but it's still fundamentally tied to a corporation selling supplements. My approach removes those conflicts of interest." He was quiet for a moment. "You're pushing me out of the influence sphere I built." "I'm expanding the sphere to include perspectives beyond product sales," I corrected. "Your initiative deserves enormous credit for starting this conversation. I'm just continuing it." More silence then. "What does Vanessa think about this?" "Why don't you ask her?" I suggested gently. "She's your daughter, not just your brand ambassador." The conversation ended shortly after, with Ralph promising we would discuss this further. I knew we would, but the momentum was already on my side. With the naming rights secured, I had a platform that even Carter Fitness Supplements couldn't overshadow. Phase 3 was officially underway. The Paris Olympics unfolded just as I remembered from my first life, but I experienced them from an entirely different perspective. Not as a competitor, but as a power broker. The Kim Athletic Performance Center, formerly Bercy Arena, hosted the gymnastics competition with prominent signage displaying my company's branding alongside the Olympic rings. My box seats offered a perfect view of the competition floor, where a new generation of gymnasts performed with a blend of artistry and athletics that reflected the rule changes my advocacy had helped implement. On the second day of competition, Ralph Carter joined me in my box, his expression a careful neutral. "Impressive setup," he commented, gesturing to the arena. "Though I notice there's no Carter Fitness Supplements presence this cycle." "The International Olympic Committee approved only one major sponsor from the gymnastics sector," I replied. My bid was apparently more compelling. He studied me for a moment. You've outmaneuvered me, Mira. I'm still trying to figure out how. I smiled. Not outmaneuvered, just focused on different goals. Your company needs to sell products. I only need to change the sport. And cutting our sponsorship presence was necessary for that change? There was an edge to his voice now. Removing conflicts of interest is essential for true reform, I said simply. The Federation relied too heavily on your funding, which gave you disproportionate influence over decisions that should have been about athlete welfare, not corporate interests. My influence helped create healthier training protocols, he argued. The initiative has improved conditions for gymnasts. It has, I acknowledged, and I'm building on that foundation. But without the pressure to promote supplements or prioritize certain athletes for marketing purposes. He seemed about to argue further, but was interrupted by the announcement of the next competitor, a 24-year-old Italian gymnast returning for her third Olympics, a longevity that would have been nearly impossible under the old system. That's what this is really about, I said, nodding toward the gymnast who was preparing for her bar routine. Creating a sport where athletes can have actual careers, not just brief moments of glory followed by a lifetime of physical consequences. Ralph watched the routine in silence, his expression softening slightly as the crowd erupted in applause for the veteran performer. Vanessa could have been out there, he said finally, if her back hadn't given out. Vanessa is thriving at UCLA, I reminded him gently, and considering medical school, last I heard. He nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. She seems happy, different, but happy. Because she had options, I said. That's what every athlete deserves. The ability to choose their path without being funneled into a system that treats them as disposable. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. Your company is taking over the sustainability programs we started, isn't it? That's the real play here. Partnership, not takeover, I corrected. Kim Athletic Consulting wants to work with the Carter Sustainability Initiative, but with a clearer separation between athlete welfare programs and supplement sales. And if I refuse? I met his gaze steadily. Then we proceed independently with the backing of the Olympic community and Federation officials who respond to funding. Either way, the changes are happening. Ralph Carter was many things. Opportunistic, occasionally ruthless, blindly devoted to his daughter's success. But he wasn't stupid. He recognized when the tide had turned. I want board representation, he said finally, and prominent acknowledgement of the initiative's foundational role. Done, I agreed immediately. This was never about erasing your contributions, Ralph. It's about building something that transcends any single corporate interest, including, eventually, my own. As we turned our attention back to the competition, I felt a profound sense of closure. In my first life, I'd died clutching a bronze medal in this very arena, bitter about a system that had cheated me out of gold, and in this life, I'd transformed that system, saved my own life, and possibly countless others who would have broken themselves against the unyielding demands of elite gymnastics. The bronze medal from my first life had felt like a failure. The silver from Tokyo in this timeline was displayed proudly in my office. But neither compared to the victory I felt watching these Olympics unfold in an arena bearing my name, under rules I'd helped reshape, showcasing athletes whose careers would be longer and healthier because of changes I'd implemented. No medal could match that. 2 days later, as the women's all-around final concluded, I stood to applaud the medalists, none of whom had been favored by pre-Olympic marketing, all of whom had earned their positions through clean, consistent performances. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, watching from LA. Can't believe how different it all looks compared to when we competed. You actually did it, Mira, I smiled, typing back, we did it. Your retirement statement changed the conversation. Her response came quickly. Dad's still here with you, right? Tell him I'll call later. He's finally stopped trying to get me to defer med school applications. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I caught sight of a plaque near my seat, commemorating the arena's official name change. Beneath the Kim Athletic Performance Center designation was a smaller inscription, dedicated to athletes past and present who remind us that victory takes many forms. In my first life, I'd died believing my story was a tragedy, the talented gymnast robbed of gold by politics and favoritism. In this life, I'd recognize the true tragedy would have been allowing that bitter narrative to define me, rather than using my knowledge to create lasting change. They had given my medal to the favorite again. But after Rebirth, I'd sponsored the event, cut the funding that enabled corruption, and built something far more valuable than any gold medal could ever be. A legacy that would outlive me, no matter when my heart eventually decided to stop.
Arts and crafts stream, just decorating envelopes in your best impression of a 4-year-old. I'll do them with my right hand. How about that? Holy crap. Bacon, pepperoni, sausage, and sopressata. 4 meat. Indeed. 4 meat, no cheese. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Do I have... Ooh, maybe. I'll do it in the Derwent light fast. They'll never know it's with my expensive pencils. My expensils. Let's do a beautiful... I'll just write your address live on stream. Okay. There's not a lot of bright colors in there, though. Okay, I'm doing it with my right hand. Okay, what are we gonna draw? Vinny, watch out. Careful where you're typing that, buddy. You just never know who's watching. The stream's now all about the doxing. Draw a bird. Okay, I'm gonna draw a star. I'm making it bad on purpose. Okay.